I don't know about you folks. When I see real estate statistics, I always come back to Lance Lambert at Resi Club. He is housing, housing, housing. And today I want to talk about the Redfin report that says 680,000 more sellers than buyers. A, I want to really know what the heck that means. B, I want to know what it looks like in comparison. And C, I want to know if it simply means this is the best buyer's market in the last decade or so. Lance, you're amazing. What you do at Resi Club is truly impressive. But what the heck is going on with Redfin and a scary headline of 680,000 more sellers than buyers?
Yeah, so one thing to know about Redfin data is that usually they start their data line where their own internal data starts, which is 2013. So
Okay.
whenever they say, the worst market on record or whatever on record or best on record, it's all back to 2013 because that's when Mankind started according to Redfin's data.
Okay.
And
That's good to know, actually. Yes.
And so with their analysis, they try to calculate the number of buyers and the number of sellers. Now, in the real world, you can essentially calculate the number of sellers in any given time, right? It's the number of active homes for sale. It's the number of, new homes for sale. Now, there does start to become this blurred area of, well, during the pandemic, some of the homes that were for sale, there was a slight suppression to new listings more than normal because so many things were selling so quickly, they didn't even go on the market, right? Mm-hmm. And then you also have the idea of like open door, just mailing people, like here's what we would buy your home for, right? And so it kind of unlocked some homes for sale, right? Okay. So there can be a little bit of a blur and, any given time, there's always some shadow inventory, especially over on new construction, right? Not everything is listed in the MLS. So there's a little bit of blur, but at the end of the day, you can calculate how many number of sellers with some margin of error, right? It's a little easier. The harder one is buyers. They will always be the hardest to calculate because who is a buyer? Yes, somebody searching for a home, looking at Zillow, if they're out there making offers, you could probably say they're a buyer, right?
I would think so.
But,
yeah.
There's also this, phenomenon where people can go from not being a buyer to buyer very quickly. And there's also these peripheral buyers that are kind of hard to calculate. So in my opinion, housing demand ran a lot hotter than some of the calculations for housing demand during the pandemic because so many people were out there bidding that weren't actually able to transact. There were so many people trying to get in there and buy, right? And so many bids on each of these properties. That's demand, but if you count demand as just a purchase, right, it doesn't necessarily fall into that.
I want to poke at that a little bit because I think you just said something that's important if I understand it correctly. So as the calculation goes inside Redfin today, let's just say it's 2021 again and the market is crazy and a house gets 8 offers. They accept one of the 8 offers. Is it fair to say that under your understanding of Redfin's calculation, they count that demand as 1 and not 8? Or do you know?
Yes, I believe that would. So they do not estimate buyers on Redfin traffic or customer acquisition data. I would have to look deeper, but yeah, they definitely would not be counting all of that, right?
And so that's important because again, this is why I have a problem with that chart is because I agree with you. Supply is really relatively easy and probably fairly accurate, minus some shadow inventory. It's the demand side that I think is always underreported. Because again, as somebody who's been an active buyer in real estate for almost 30 years, I'm always a buyer at the right price. I'm always a buyer of certain inventory. And I often get in situations where I'm one of 5 buyers or bidders or whatever you want to call it. And to only count one demand because there's one asset, that's disingenuous and not accurate because there were actually 5 people that wanted it, but only one person that got it. So that's an interesting tweak.
And so the way that I like to do this when I calculate it is I like to do months of supply on one axis, and I like to do year-over-year change in existing home sales or prices, prices. So price and supply. And so where that equilibrium falls, So currently around 4 months of supply, but you're around like 1% appreciation, right? That takes you into the quadrant that's the softest since 2012.
Yeah.
But it's not like the GFC level.
Yeah.
Now, if you just went off the months of supply, you would not see that we are as soft as we are because you're not also accounting for the price. So I like to take in that. So we're a little weaker than suggested just purely based on months of supply when you also take into account price. So
I love that. That axis makes complete sense to me because again, it allows you to understand, is the market have a lot of supply because of growth or shrinking or prices, or it just tells you when you look at both axes, it really does tell you a much better picture. So that's well done. I like those two.
And the other thing is you can also kind of watch it as it kind of pulls back too. So as it shoots out and then it kind of like right now, what's happened, my narrative of the housing market the past 9 months has been a market that went from a burst of softening. Mm-hmm. That burst of softening is kind of stabilized, and we've stabilized into a place that is just a soft market. So we were softening, and then where the softening burst stopped, it just put us at that equilibrium that's soft. So appreciation kind of kept decelerating down to 1%, close to zero. And then months of supply, inventory's ticking up a tad, but it's not moving much on my equilibrium chart, right? We just kept moving out, and then it just landed. And
it's really interesting to me because when I think about demand, again, there's so many metrics in real estate and housing, as you know, but instead of just looking at transactions, which it appears Redfin is doing, I'm not sure why you wouldn't maybe look at mortgage applications or some other leading indicator. I think there's a far better leading indicator of demand than a housing transaction, right? A housing transaction is kind of like the end of it, as opposed to a leading indicator, which might be a mortgage application or it might be open house tours or some other indicator of demand. There's got to be something earlier in the cycle, no?
Now, I do like the analysis. The problem is people are having trouble reading it. And the way they have formatted it, they've kind of really formatted this for marketing purposes, right?
Yeah, the scariest headline possible, yes.
Yeah, and people like to kind of read it as buyers, sellers, like that total number. They don't like to think of things as like equilibrium, right? But if you took their data and replicated their analysis using the same methodology, and you also did it back to the 2000s, and then you took that data and you created a scatter plot where it's buyers on one side, sellers on other, right? And it would place it at a similar level that I'm getting on my chart. Now, the reason I say that, another thing to keep in mind here is that when they say the most on record, and there's 600,000 sellers outnumbering buyers,
right?
If you replicated their methodology, it would at least be a 2 million delta instead of 600,000 delta back in 2008, because they take active inventory as their supply.
Right.
Inventory then was around 4 million.
I'm so glad you brought this up because, again, a lot of people reading this chart, lots of doomers out there pushing doom. They're trying to say, see, this is worse than the GFC. A, it's not. Their data only goes back to 2013. And B, if you took that and you extended it back to 2008, it would be 2 million. It's like kind of like little brother, big brother, like not even in the same world. 600 versus 2 million. That's 3x. That's crazy.
And so then if you replicated it for the 2000s and then you did a scatter plot of both, you would end up getting a story that's very close to price versus months of supply. It would tell a very similar story. And if you look at the data closely, what you will see is there was a burst of softening that was occurring 24 into 25, and especially last year, really, right? That inventory build. And then since it's kind of the softening burst is, the burst is done, right? Now where we've landed is this very soft place. And so that actual delta, that number has not changed too much more. It's inched up a little bit, but it's still around the same place, which is a soft place, a place where, especially in many of these Sunbelt markets, they are buyers markets, right? Now, they're not necessarily, most of them, GFC style buyers markets where that was an extreme buyers market, but there are buyers markets along the past of certain of these windows.
Yeah, the 90s, for example,
early 90s in some of these areas. that's where we are as of today. Now, a thing to keep in mind is there is still a tremendous amount of variation across the country. You go through these markets, you'll see very different stories. And then within those softer, weaker patches, some areas have firmed up a little bit better than others. So if you look at like what Toll Brothers has said on their earnings, a lot of Florida is looking a little better for them of late. The prices have fallen some. That inventory build, though, is not building like it was. Now, if you're looking at my data, some of these markets are actually falling a little bit year over year for inventory. So they're seeing a little bit better. But Toll Brothers is saying Tampa still challenged, still challenged there. And then yesterday, or actually March 24th, 2026, KB Homes reported.
Yeah.
And they said that they are seeing a little bit of demand improvement in Jacksonville and Orlando, but that Tampa's still challenged. Right? So when you pull back the onion, you'll see nuance. Now, another thing that KB said is that when you take any other markets across the country, there are going to be some patches where there's a little bit of challenge, and then there's others that aren't, right? They have some resilient areas in every market, and they have some weak ones in every market. So there is a lot of nuance out there. And so where the housing market has been in this very squeezed equilibrium where both demand is suppressed, but also even if you're looking at that Redfin chart, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily high. And so you can very easily, also depending on the seasonality element, swing from, something that's kind of a buyer's market to very briefly being a little bit on the seller side. And then it could even swing back. We're just in this very, very affordability constrained market, but where there isn't a ton of distress on the homeowners at large. And they are still at the table with a little bit of the stronger hands this cycle. And so that's where we are right now. And we're still kind of going through that recalibration period.
Love it. Love it. The end of the day, when I look at that chart and I kind of step back as a real estate investor, what it tells me, and I think you validated for me, is we are just in the best buyer's market in mass in over a decade. And again, a buyer's market's okay, right? Right. Disrespectful offers follow, look for motivated sellers. That's what you should be doing. I would much rather be in a buyer's market than a seller's market. I don't want to repeat 2021. 2021 was crazy. It was not a great time to find deals. Everybody was selling everything in 7 seconds. So the fact that Redfin is putting out this negative headline is great news to me. It scares people, and it just makes the buyer's market better.
Yeah, and you need to go through some of that period to get to more favorable yields, right? You got to have this bit of a period, especially after that pandemic housing boom run up. Anything else you want to get into?
I guess the last thing to wrap this up with you is obviously we have a lot going on. Interest rates are up 0.5 point. We've got new homes costing less than existing homes. We got a lot of other stuff coming. Maybe you can tease us with articles you're working on for next week. What do we got working on for next week at Resi Club?
Well, one of the things I'm looking into is oil prices. And one thing that's interesting in housing is that there are a couple markets in the country where home prices are very correlated to oil.
Oh,
and it's a few of these areas in the Texas Perma basin, or basin, or what?
Basin, yeah, I think. It's
and a few of those areas, like Midland, Texas, where when I run the numbers, even in 2000 or 2020, when the pandemic housing boom was starting, right? And, you had a lot of these markets starting to rip, in particular in Texas, right? Austin's roaring. You go out into Midland area, right? Because briefly during the pandemic, they had
they couldn't give away oil. There was a time it was a negative number.
Exactly. And it created a bit of a mini oil bust. And so their prices did not move up with everybody else's at that time. And you go back through history and you can see that correlation there. So I'm looking at that, trying to see, take a look at it. Because if you go through a scenario where we go through a prolonged period of much higher oil prices than are currently expecting, then those markets could actually have,
disproportionate return.
Yeah, they could actually go through a mini housing boom while everybody else is,
Look at you. I love this tying
So,
economics and housing together. Great job.
kind of interesting to look into. Another thing kind of just continuing to look into is, how does AI end up impacting the labor market? The thing with housing is you have this cyclical element in housing where, demand is much more elastic than supply. So you can go through these booms, right? And we're in that period where we went through that cyclical window and it kind of pulls ahead some of the prices from the future. And we're kind of going through that recalibration, right? And smoothing it out. But you also have that's one part of housing, that cyclical element. But you also have this secular part, which is just the incomes in your area, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those, are usually on very, prolonged trajectories that are moving and pushing up the intrinsic value, the real value of housing, even if it's not like the nominal that people are paying from the incomes, right? And so you have a place like San Francisco where today house prices are 2,400% higher than they were in 1975.
Wow.
And then you have US house prices that are up about 1,000% versus 1975. And then you have Youngstown, Ohio, that's up 400%.
Wow.
And so the story there is that, San Francisco, the Bay Area, was one of the biggest winners of where the economies went the past 40 years, right? Tech, finance, globalization benefited from it, right? And then Youngstown has been on kind of the losing end of some of these really big secular swings, right? Steel, right? Manufacturing. And so if AI is going to create shifts in income and hit certain groups more than others, right? And maybe AI raises incomes for certain groups and then it also lowers it for others. If you're not working off of the pure like doomsday, everybody thinks that AI is just going to, eat up everything. But I think it's more likely that AI will work like other technological advances, at least in the short term, and boost incomes in some areas and push down.
I like it.
And so if you can predict where that's going to occur and which groups are going to benefit the most and which might be the losers, that feeds down to long-term real estate. And so that's a part of it. And then the other thing is, even if you have a scenario where, let's say, AI is way more advanced than we think, and it would actually suppress, the labor market and create this downward pressure on overall incomes. Well, in that scenario, you would have some type of UBI that would be created, right?
For sure.
So if that were to be created, the ones who would be the least likely to lose, in my view, just thinking of this intuitively, might be the real estate investors, because in that scenario that AI is way more advanced than we think, and it's going to have a much bigger impact, there's going to be a lot of companies that just go bust, right? And so some of this stock investing could be very risky. Whereas on the real estate side, even in the scenario where AI, really blows out the labor market and puts downward pressure on wages, you would have the government stepping in with some type of
just like COVID. Yep.
Probably create some type of floor. So that's kind of some of the, the fun things that I'm working on at the moment, and just kind of thinking through. Those are really hard things to predict.
Yeah.
But just, doing a little bit of research and seeing what data we can find.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing it. You're far smarter and more accurate at all this stuff. So I'm glad that you're doing it. If somebody wanted to get these articles, they go to ResiClubAnalytics.com right there on the screen. Thank you so much. We'll talk in a week.
Thank you, Zuber.